I don't want you to miss this. Okay. Okay, thank you. We're going to get started. Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming to the Political Action Committee plenary. I'm Bonnie Grabenhofer. I'm the Action Vice President. Thank you. And this is one of my favorite things to do, is talk about politics. And so I thank you again for this fun job. And one of the things that I really like to do, and enjoy doing it now, is working with Linda Berg, our political director. Where's Linda? There's Linda in the back. And I enjoy working with the state chapters with this political work, the candidates, and the Political Action Committee. And I'd like to take a moment to introduce the Political Action Committee, who's been working very hard. So please stand when I introduce you. There's Bear Atwood, whom I don't think is at the conference today. Liz Harper, you here? Stand, wave. Jackie Cozen, Joycelyn Morris, Linda Tosti Lane, Kim Villanueva, and the officers, Terry, Chitra, and myself. Those are the PAC. Senior advisors to the PAC are Gay Brune and Pat Roos. Pat, you here? She's probably coaxing more money out of people. That's selling bricks. She's selling more bricks. And advisory board co-chairs are Janet Canterbury and Ellie Smeal. And also advisory board chairs are Kara Mosley Braun and Patricia Ireland, who are joining us on the panel today. The PAC has done a lot of work endorsing about 100 great candidates so far, figuring out a strategy for winning key races in November, and fundraising to make that happen. At the exhibit table, if you haven't been lassoed and your pockets shaken out, they've been working on the fundraising, selling the bricks to the Build the White House and the Path to the White House in 2016, and strengthening the Congress in 2014. So come and buy some bricks and help make that happen. How many have already bought bricks? All right. Oh, we are going to win. I know we are going to win because we got bricks. Okay. I really like the theme of this year's conference, Faces of Feminism, Strength and Diversity. Don't you love that? And it is so true. Diversity does make us stronger and better. When NOW was founded, our founding sisters adopted a statement of purpose with broad concerns to gain equality for all women in all facets of their lives. And one of NOW's values is we don't leave any women behind. And we have come to understand that we have more dimensions than just being women, that we are multidimensional. Women includes categories of race, sexual orientation, age, ability and disability, and class. And those things make people vulnerable to different forms of bias, and it can shape the way we experience bias. For example, women of different races experience sexism and discrimination very differently. These factors can limit access to employment, fair immigration, health care, education, and domestic violence. The women in our country face many challenges, but we can't solve them for all women without input from multiple perspectives. We need to understand the needs of different women and different types of women and the effects of policy on those differently situated. I've seen the strength and diversity in so much of the work that we do and how important it is to have a variety of voices at the table. For example, I'm from Illinois and want to show a little story about how strengthening and broadening our diversity helped with one of the things we did. We got tired of beating back all the restrictions on reproductive rights and decided to write a Freedom of Choice Act in Illinois. And we did that based on some models that we found, and we made sure to include young and poor women. And we got our most frequent allies, Planned Parenthood and the ACLU, to support it with us, and we found a sponsor and got it introduced. And it didn't get too far the first year. Then we greatly expanded the coalition to include a couple of dozen organizations that were very diverse. The bill was rewritten and greatly strengthened to address needs that weren't addressed in the first version. And then in focus groups about the revised bill, we were really surprised to learn that even Latinas who did not consider themselves pro-choice supported the bill because of the increase in access to reproductive health care. So we learned a lot. It was renamed the Reproductive Justice and Access Act, and it met diverse needs and had broad support from a broad range of groups. And then for another example, consider the Violence Against Women Act. We thought we addressed the problem of violence against women. Later, we discovered that some women were underserved, Native American and immigrant women and lesbians. And we all had to work together to add protections to ensure more of those needs were adequately met, and it covered all women. We, as a women's movement, have to get better about ensuring the inclusion of all voices. We need to get diverse women elected so those voices are at the table. And we need to listen and support them so they're not the lone voice. Being more inclusive will make now stronger, it'll make the women's movement stronger, and it'll make our country stronger, and it starts with electing the right people. I am thrilled to be joined by this fabulous panel that's going to talk about multicultural women's voices and votes. We're going to hear from Congresswoman Michelle Lujan Grisham. And for anybody who doesn't know, she represents New Mexico's 1st Congressional District, where we are. Christine Sierra is a professor and director of the Southwest Hispanic Research Institute. Kimberly Peeler Allen, co-founder of Higher Heights for America. And Ambassador Carol Mosley Braun, former senator and co-chair of our advisory committee. And Patricia Ireland, former now president and co-chair of the Excuse me while I do my Rubio imitation. Thank you. I could reach. Congresswoman Grisham is serving her first term as representative of New Mexico's 1st Congressional District, which includes Albuquerque. She is a lifelong supporter of women's reproductive rights, a strong voice against the Republican war on women, and a champion fighting for the rights of women. She supports comprehensive immigration reform and, among other things, protects the unity and sanctity of the family, including the families of binational same-sex couples. We are excited to be here in her district. Please welcome the representative.
I tried to stay right where I was because it was near the coffee. Well, good afternoon. What a warm welcome. I'm really incredibly honored to even be invited. And I'm proud of my work and my position, but I am quite impressed and quite honored that I would be included in a panel with this kind of expertise, and it would have been leading the country in so many incredible ways, showing what value there is. I mean, we know this. I feel a little bit like I'm preaching to the choir, but the value and the importance of having women's voices at all levels in leadership and policy positions, because we know the tipping point is real. If we have 3 or more women in leadership positions, whether it's in Congress, at every subcommittee, in every committee, in leadership, seniority positions, as CEOs, on the companies that have women, 3 or more on their boards, they make more money, they do better work, they are more community-minded, they are more philanthropic, they have a relationship to the people that they serve. And I know we've been saying, ladies, for a long time, our time has come, but our time has come because the country has never been in worse shape in terms of our ability to work together, focus on the right priorities, and really have that incredible connection. And I'm going to do what all shameless politicians do, is tell you a story. Maybe it's about a month ago, I was honored by the Women's Bar Association. And for folks who are not from New Mexico, I have a law degree. Notice I didn't say I'm a lawyer, because I practiced law for 10 whole minutes. I was really quite good. I won all my cases, which means that I have a better record than Perry Mason. So to get this award from the Women's Bar Association that really focuses on lawyers who are practicing, made an incredible difference in whatever their area of expertise is in their community, I was really honored. And the name of this award is the Henrietta Pettyjohn Award in New Mexico, and it's named after the very first woman in New Mexico to be admitted to the bar. Now that in and of itself, and one of those territorial Western, Southwesterns, I'm Hispanic, so I think I can do this with a little more impunity, male-dominated cultures. This was an amazing thing. And in fact, she was admitted to the bar in 1892, 12 full years before New Mexico even became a state. Now here's the part, more than being a trailblazer, that's astounding, but I want to talk about where we are in that arc, that bridge of development. They had to admit her to the bar because she passed the exam, right? Which means she had the same knowledge as all of her male counterparts. But when the bar commissioners at that time, the authority, all men, to make the decision about whether you were qualified, there was a statement in your license that said that not only did you pass the test, which meant you were knowledgeable with law, but there was a statement in the license that said that you were well qualified for the practice of law. And in her admission, that all-male panel struck that language from her license, because we know that by virtue of her gender in 1892, she could not have been well qualified for the practice of law. So this has been, this award really talks about where women are in that profession, the impacts and differences they make, and it reminds me now of being a member of Congress, of the institution of Congress, because it took 25 years after Henrietta Pettyjohn for Jeanette Rankin from Montana to become the first woman to be elected to the House of Representatives and be a member of Congress. And in that 100 years, we only have 99 women currently in the House, and a total of 200, not in the House, in Congress, and a total of 298 women who have served in a body that has had tens of thousands, 12,000 members over our 200-year history. Now, 20% for those of you who have been working and fighting and advocating tirelessly for decades, is definitely a move in the right direction. But until it's 51 or it's 75%, it's not enough because it doesn't get us to the tipping point. And what you do, your presence here today, is that enough. It begins to turn the dynamic. And I know that you know all of the issues. Women need to be asked to run. We have a tendency, and I'm one of those, and I'm still proud of this, but I waited until my family situation was completely different. Now, I think actually that's a unique issue for me in Congress because I'm a caregiver for my mother, and if more members of Congress were caregivers for their children and their aging parents and their adult disabled children, they would bring to Congress a set of experiences that are necessary in today's environment to successfully serve our families and to improve the conditions in which we live in all of our communities, from education to healthcare and from economic development. We need women with those experiences, but we need women of all ages, all backgrounds, all colors to be in this institution, to be at the forefront of policymaking. Thank you. And in my freshman class, I want to highlight that we're doing that. I am the president, which I'm very proud of the most diverse Democratic class in the history of the Democratic caucus. There are 16 women. Now, remember, there's 51 of us, so 16 again isn't enough, but it's a step in the right direction. And it's showing that our numbers are in fact growing. And we have women of color. We have two Latinas, myself included. We have two women who are African American. We have a woman who's Asian. We have women who are young. We have women who are bisexual. We have women who are have done very well socioeconomically, and women who haven't, who are all part of this group of 16 who bring together a diversity, a dynamic, a new, real, powerful force for change in Congress. And you know, we've seen that change the way in which Congress works. So for a first-time member of Congress, you know, I grew up in a family where there was no such thing. You can't bring home even a C. I was raised in a household, no matter what the barriers were, you had to bring home or an A or a B. I mean, it was really an A homework family. You know, it's tough to come back to my constituents and say, I belong to the F or worse Congress, right? That I'm the president of the class of the F Congress. Because in Congress's entire history, last year, in 2013, the first part of the 113th session, we were the worst Congress in the history of the nation, which included a nearly, one of the almost longest, I think it's second or third, longest government shutdowns in the history of our Congress, with what looked like very little hope to break through. All right, we have, with the introduction of the Tea Party, there's no place to go, right? You go to the lowest common denominator to start your efforts of cooperation, and we find that there's no common denominator anywhere. Except what happened? And I know I'm reminding you, but it bears, you know, we have to bear witness and we have to repeat. What happened in the darkest hours when it is clear that the F Congress, so broken that no one can fix it, that our constituents have lost hope in the institution? Women stood up. And bipartisan, women in the Senate began to broker a deal, and they did it, you know, they started it before the government shutdown, and it got a little great positive reaction, but it wasn't sustained. The Violence Against Women's Act, and Bonnie, thank you for raising that, it was the only substantive piece of legislation that I got to vote on in that year. The only substantive piece of, I mean, I can tell you I named a lot of coins and post offices. A lot of them. I don't think there's one missing a name anywhere in the country. Because women bipartisan, bicameral, had enough. And they did it again. They stopped the government shutdown. They negotiated a budget and got it passed. They brought back from the dead, they brought their defibrillators, and they resurrected the Farm Bill. And for New Mexicans who are here, that is an incredible component of our economy in a state that arguably has one of the worst economies in the country. We need the Farm Bill, but by the same token, we also, unfortunately, in the country now have the hungriest children. So we needed to resurrect that bill, but we can't have a $40 billion, $20 billion cut. And I don't love the $8.5 billion cut, but we protected the nutrition program. We created an exception so that New Mexicans would not be hurt further, and an opportunity to restore that in the future. Women got that done. Women passed a clean debt ceiling, and Senator McCluskey is beginning an appropriations process that's meaningful. Now, we'll see how that works when it gets over to the House. You know, right now we're sort of just shuffling the deck as we pass authorizations and appropriations. They're not reflective of the right priorities, are not really about investments in the country. But if we don't learn to go through the motions as these incredible women who are creating a brand new dynamic, there's no hope. So we're doing, I know this is going to be shocking to you, we're doing both things at once. I know. And I'm going to take up too much of my time and take you away. I want to do one selfish plug, because I've got a bill that I am so excited about that I'd love to tell you I thought of by myself in my room, because I'm that smart, but I didn't. It came from you. And it is incredible, and it reflects the kind of policymaking that occurs when women are at the table. Not on the menu, at the table, having dinner. It's called the HEAL Act, and it's the Health, Equity, and Access Law for Women and Families. Now, this bill's got more than, I think, probably Mariana, 250 now organizations, and it's going up. We'll hit 300 maybe by the end of the year. It's the only bill that I'm aware of that's got the United Nations Human Rights Committee as an endorsee on the bill. And this is what it does. It says that immigrants with legal status, and let me just repeat that because this is outrageous. Immigrants with legal status, 600,000 families, are barred, even though they pay taxes. They are barred from access for 5 years to the Children's Health Insurance Program. They are barred from buying insurance products on the exchange. They are barred then because if they can't buy it, they certainly aren't going to be eligible if they are qualified by virtue of their income for any of the subsidies. And do you know what that means? It means that on average, one of those individuals is paying $1,200 to address the flu. And you know where they're addressing the flu? In your emergency rooms and hospitals. So we're going to ask you to pay more, because the fact that they're immigrant families, we want to bar because we don't want them to access any of our programs. It is bad policy. It is disrespectful. It hurts women who are leading healthcare investments for their families. And we're going to get that changed, and we're going to create equity and fairness, and we're going to get Congress to a place, because you're there helping us, to a place where we can be fair and provide equity and justice to American families forevermore. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was wonderful and inspiring, and thanks for the good work. Next, I'd like to introduce Professor Christine Sierra, who teaches at the University of New Mexico and researches in the field of American politics with a focus on race, ethnicity, and gender. Her publications include work on Mexican-American activism, on immigration policy, Hispanic politics in New Mexico, and the politics of Latina women in the United States. Her current major research project is a national study of elected officials of color in the United States. She'll share with us some of what she's learned about gender and multicultural leadership. Christine.
Bienvenidos todos a Nuevo Mexico. I hope we're treating you well. It is an honor to be here, and thank you to the NOW organizers for the invitation. I'm going to speak today as a political scientist and an academic, but try not to bore you. I simply want to highlight what I think are some important points to observe in terms of how we are as women exerting power in the American electorate. But because of the theme of this panel, I want to focus specifically on the strategic location of women of color in U.S. electoral politics. Most of you, if not all of you, probably know these basic facts, but I think it's a good thing to remind ourselves about the importance of women in our American electorate. We as women make up a majority of the U.S. voting age population. We are a majority of registered voters. We are a majority of actual voters, and that is not likely to change. Women of color are also a key element in this influential electorate. Surely, because of these basic facts, parties and candidates should work very hard to get our support. With regards to women of color, we as women of color are right there in terms of importance in our relative ethnic, racial electorates. And not only that, but we are showing additional influence. Latinas have, for example, higher voter turnout rates than do Latino men. In 2012, African American voter turnout surpassed those of all other ethno-racial groups, and especially demanding national attention, the African American voter turnout rates surpassed the white voter turnout rates for the first time. So not only have African Americans closed that voting gap, but they have now surpassed whites. African American women largely drove this increase in black turnout rates. I can't help but draw our attention a little bit to the 2012 election. I teach this election quite a bit in my classes, whether they are on women or ethnic minorities. But it is a fun election because, as one of my colleagues has put it, demographics is destiny election. It showed that demographics really do matter in who gets elected at the presidential level. And so what I presented to you here is just the basic percentages to reinforce. If white people had been the only ones voting, we would have a President Romney. But we have African Americans who turned out upwards of 90% and plus, and the Hispanic vote was also quite strong for President Obama's reelection at 71%, and Asian American voters joined that at 73%. Women and women of color were especially important to President Obama's reelection. Women voted for Obama 55% to 44% for Romney, and that was overall. And I will add, actually, that is boosted, those total numbers are boosted by women of color. And in each of the demographic groups that I'm talking about here, women actually voted for Obama at higher levels than their male counterparts. So for example, Latina support for Obama was at 76%, and Latino men supported Obama, but at a slightly lower level. It is clear that we are in the midst of not only demographic change in terms of the racial and ethnic diversity of our population, but we are also starting to see generational shifts. And for those of us who are looking forward to how we engage young people, it is very important to consider women of color in that demographic shift and what is happening in our country. Political scientist McManus says, it was Latina, Asian, and African American young women who gave the biggest boost to the president's reelection. And women of color are a critical part of this new emerging electorate, which is more racially and ethnically diverse than older voters. So just as an example, I show you some data of the 18 to 29-year-old millennial electorate as compared to the baby boomer electorate. And the boomers are 76% white, but you see there that the millennials are 58% white. And where are the major increases? Well, there's clearly an increase in the black young voter electorate, but there's also, and I would point out that we sure hear a whole lot about that increasing Latina vote. Well, look at that. Hispanics were only 8% of the 30-plus electorate, but 18% of the 18 to 29 electorate. So I would suggest that the women of color have become particularly important strategically for engaging and recruiting this new emerging electorate. Certainly, the Democratic Party and its candidates, I would submit to you, are highly dependent on turnout from this electorate. And if the Republican Party wants to stay in existence, I would suggest to it that it start reaching out for some kind of crossover appeal. Well, as an office holding, we as women are there but underrepresented. Women in total in the U.S. Congress comprise 18.5% of the seats. 20, as the Congresswoman told us, 20 in the U.S. Senate and 79 in the U.S. House. For women of color, we are there but severely underrepresented. African American women amount to 14 in the Congress with 2 non-voting delegates. Latina women, 9, and that is a very important number that we should be very proud of, and our own Congresswoman is one of those important policymakers. All right. And they are also quite competent and credible policymakers, I would add, but too few. Asian women, that Mazie Hirono, 1 in the Senate and 7 in the House. But look at Native American representation, nil. That's intolerable. With regards to office holding at other levels of office, let me just quickly, let's see if I can go back. There we go. Mention that, of course, state legislative office is really important. It is also important as a stepping stone to higher federal office. African American women are 241 in state legislatures across the country. Statewide executive office is even harder to achieve, and there are certain specific reasons for that. But we have only 2 who are African American holding statewide office. For Latinas, the numbers are 87 in state legislatures, and 5 are Latinas in statewide office. Now, I'm a Democrat, but I'm also an academic, so I have to acknowledge that one of those 5, of course, actually 2 of those 5, are Hispanic women here in the state of New Mexico, representing the Republican side of the aisle, but they are our governor and our Secretary of State. Asian American women, in state legislatures, there are 34 of them, but statewide executive office, only 1. And then finally, for Native Americans, there are 13 in state legislatures, and only one is Native American at the statewide level. Whoops. Let me just quickly cite some general categories of things that we use to explain the difficulties of attaining office. Some are attitudinal, and one of the things that I have tried to promote through a Ready to Run program here in New Mexico, and I saw several participants who have participated in that, is to encourage women to run for public office and even to think about running for public office. But one of the things that we encounter is that many women feel that they are not quite ready to run. But you know what? Their capabilities, their skills are outstanding. We tend to underestimate our talent, and that sometimes makes us hesitant to put our hat into the ring. Socioeconomic factors, of course, are important. The disadvantaged socioeconomic position of women of color, and the Congresswoman also mentioned that for many of us, we are also caregivers for both young children, but also for the elderly. And I think that's a very important responsibility, but it also keeps us from running for public office. And then finally, institutional political conditions like the power of incumbency, the fact that for running for statewide office, for example, we know about racially polarized voting, that generally white voters do not cross over and vote for minority candidates. So when you're not running in a majority-minority district, like for statewide office, you're running for the whole state. It sometimes depresses the possibilities of both women and men of color of getting elected to statewide office. In terms of other trends with more positive outcomes for women of color, let me mention just a few. Women of color are elected at higher rates than men of color, and that has been happening since about 2000 at the state, in states and for state legislature and for Congress. Women of color have been getting elected at higher rates or faster rates than white women. And women of color form a greater share of minority representatives as a total than do white women among white elected officials. And generally, for black women, Latinas, and Asians, we amount to about 30% of the elected officialdom from our respective ethno-racial groups, which is higher than for white women. Couple of reasons. Well, it appears that we are also increasing our qualifications to run for office, but there is also a change, and this is interesting, of voter perceptions of women of color and their qualifications to run. So we are being more accepted by voters in general, and the literature suggests, or the data suggests also by white women, that there might be much more support going for women of color as candidates than for men of color. And the other is the strategic advantage of intersectionality, so that women of color are drawing from multiple groups to get support. Now, let me talk about women of color and legislative strategy. Women of color legislators can use their multifaceted identity to build coalitions, generate a more fluid policy agenda, a more inclusive policy agenda, and I am delighted that immigration is a policy agenda, is on the policy agenda of NOW and other women's organizations that I've heard from. You are to be congratulated with that. And intersectionality then provides for more options in how we represent people. My time is up, but I'm going to focus on the last slide, and that is that all in all, I think we're finding that women in public office tend to exert what we're calling a womanist style of leadership. Men can do this too, but women do it especially, and that is in governing, we tend to be inclusive, work towards transparency, broad participation, and we are indeed community-oriented. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for that wonderful overview and the insights into what we've accomplished and what we still need to accomplish. Next, I'd like to introduce Kimberly Peeler-Allen, who is a highly skilled political fundraiser and event planner. In 2011, Kimberly took her commitment to women candidates and candidates of color one step further. She founded with Glenda Carr Higher Heights for America, a national organization seeking to elevate Black women's voices to shape and advance progressive policies and politics. She'll talk to us about the power of the Black electorate and the impact of Black women in office. Kimberly.
Good afternoon. I always like to open my remarks with a quote from Shirley Chisholm. At present, our country needs women's idealism and determination, perhaps more in politics than anywhere else. Though she said this 40 years ago, it still rings just as true as today as it did then. Absolutely. Glenda Carr and I dreamed up Higher Heights about 3 years ago after combined about 20 years of experience working in progressive politics and the women's movement. And we got tired of seeing the same 4 or 5 faces of color in the room when all of these important conversations were being had. We knew so many other women, particularly Black women, who were just as passionate about these issues as we were, but their voices weren't being heard and they weren't in the political pipeline. So we decided to do something about it. Higher Heights is a national organization focused on mobilizing and electing Black women at all levels of political office. We at Higher Heights believe that a way to change the way decision-making tables work and look across this country is to empower Black women to grasp hold of the power that they already have. If they're not made aware of this power that's already in their hands, they might as well not even have it. A little more about our numbers. The video. Black women have the power to advance progressive policies and politics if they have a seat at the table. The Center for American Women in Politics at Rutgers University did a study several years ago where they showed that the best ally that you could have in a progressive movement is a Black woman, whether the issue is education, health, the economy, or social justice. The legislator you want in your corner is a Black woman. Yet and still, Black women are still severely underrepresented in elected office. We are honored, truly honored, to be in the presence of the only woman, African-American woman to serve in the US Senate, Carol Moseley Braun. There are currently only 3 women who are serving in statewide office across this country. 1 Black woman serving as a mayor of a top 100 city, and there are 10 states that currently do not have a Black woman in their state legislature. Higher Heights released a report last week entitled The Status of Black Women in American Politics, and there's some cards that are being passed around so you can download the report for your reference and review. The report provides a comprehensive lay of the land analysis of where Black women have been elected across the country as mayors, state legislators, statewide elected officials, and members of Congress. To be able to plan for the future, you must understand your past. And to quote Shirley Chisholm again, this report highlights the tremendous amount of talents that are lost to this society just because they wear a skirt. We all recognize that all issues are women's issues, but this universal truth is particularly true for Black women, as issues of poverty and criminal justice also play very prominent roles in many of the districts that we represent. Black women are a tremendous voting bloc. Almost 70% of the Black electorate are women. When Black women come out to the vote, Democrats win. You don't just have to ask President Obama. You can talk to Sherrod Brown and Terry McAuliffe, and hopefully in a couple of months, we'll be able to talk to Michelle Nunn about the impact that we had in her race. When we are able to inspire and engage Black women around the issues that they care about more than 10 days before the election, you get not just their vote, you get their household, you get their neighborhood, you get their church, and their sorority. Glenda and I have been traveling across the country over the last 2 years, talking to Black women about the issues that are most important to them. And regardless of where we are in the country or who we're talking to, what the socioeconomic status of that woman is, the issues are the same: education, pay equity, affordable health care, safe communities, and reproductive rights. We also talk to them about what they see as the barriers and the opportunities for Black women to become more engaged in the political process. And they also say the same thing. The biggest barrier is no one is talking to them. But they also say the biggest opportunity for them as elected leaders is they can speak for everyone else. Because we are business owners and veterans and advocates and mothers and wives and daughters. There is very little, if anything, that does not cross our paths in our journey. What can be done to increase the numbers of Black women in political leadership? Support them with your time, your talent, and your treasure. As a political fundraiser in New York for the last 13 years, I know the last one very, very well. And I know from firsthand experience that donors, and women are not excluded from this, generally give less to women candidates and even less to candidates of color. We also need to support organizations that are speaking directly to Black women. Higher Heights is thrilled to be partnering with NOW and other organizations that recognize that the messenger, in many cases, is just as important, and in some cases more important, than the message. By supporting organizations like Higher Heights that have a national infrastructure to mobilize and elect Black women to public office, you're increasing the number of progressive partners, increasing the number of votes that come out in tight elections, and ultimately help advance the movement. I just want to say I'm just so thrilled to be part of this panel, and especially a huge thank you to Terry and the staff at NOW. And I have to do a particular shout out to Zenaida Mendez, who's the president of New York NOW, who have just been so supportive and just tremendous partners as we have worked to make this project move forward. So thank you so much, and I look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. Next, I'd like to introduce Ambassador Carol Mosley Braun, who apparently doesn't need too much introduction. She spent nearly 30 years in public service, including being a presidential candidate for the president and ambassador to New Zealand and Samoa and state rep, U.S. attorney. In her historic 1992 race in the Year of the Woman, she became the first and only African-American woman to win election in the U.S. Senate. She was elected with the endorsement of Now PAC and the work of a lot of Now members who worked on that campaign, including my partner Gay Brune and myself. And it was the most exciting, magical campaign we ever worked on. It was really a thrill. And it was well worth it because Carol was a strong voice in Illinois, and she continued to provide the voice that we needed in the Senate. You know, we never had to explain stuff to her. She always, you know, when you brought things up, she goes, yes, of course, that's the right thing to do. And she did whatever it was we asked without even thinking of what the consequences might be. And so we thank you for all that you've done for us and your continuing advice as co-chair of NOW's Advisory Board and Political Action Committee.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and thank you, Bonnie, for that wonderful introduction, and to all of my friends here at the National Organization for Women. I owe it all to you guys. I mean, from the time of the state legislature, so I can never say thank you enough, and that's why I hope always to be part of this organization and supportive of it and working with you toward the goals that I know we all share. Last evening, I had the pleasure of being picked up at the airport by Carla Josephson and Neely Lang. Are you all here today? I hope. There they are. There they are. It was late and I was tired, but they were so gracious and gave me a wonderful introduction to New Mexico. I thank them for being active with NOW and for the contributions their efforts make, not only to the local community, but to our collective efforts to empower women. Well, it occurred to me that I want to extend those same thanks today to everybody here, every one of you, and to thank you all for your support of this essential organization. NOW is consistently and actively on the front lines of what must be seen as a global struggle, and NOW, only NOW, has never shied away from speaking truth to power. And so I'm very proud to be affiliated and associated with all of you. And Terry, you've done a fabulous job with this organization, bringing it from the brink financially, and you know, we just keep moving forward. We all benefit from your excellent service to NOW, to our community, and to the next generation of women who will have to take up this fight on whatever battlefield and landscape we leave for them. I want to say thank you. It is to the why, actually, that Bonnie asked me to speak today. And I had a whole, I want you to see, just so you know I'm not making it up, here's the type speech, okay? I'm not giving it. Whatever. Not giving it. Because the inspiration from last night actually put my head in another direction in terms of what it was I was going to talk about today. Over 100 years ago, Mary Church Terrell, one of the leading feminists of her day, spoke to the why of the suffrage movement and why the fight for the vote was essentially a patriotic fight. And she said, and I quote, "The injustice involved in denying women the suffrage is not confined to the disenfranchised sex alone, but extends to the nation as well, in that it is deprived of the excellent service which women might render." Mary Church Terrell was joined in that struggle by a prominent black woman, Anna Julia Cooper, whose efforts to achieve the vote for women arose out of the political landscape of her time, of their time. Anna was in the incongruous position of having, at least theoretically, okay, you can put the sign down, I won't go over, I promise, of having theoretically the right to vote as a black person because of the constitutional amendment, but of the 15th Amendment that had happened in 1870, but as a woman did not have the vote. And so the Constitution had not yet conferred the right to vote on women. It took them another 50 years to achieve the right to vote with the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920. Mary Church Terrell and Anna Julia Cooper understood, however, that their work was not just for them, but was to direct this country's noble experiment in democracy toward its promise of inclusion and respect for the contributions and voice of all people. Democracy, after all, democracies are based on the notion that every person is a reflection of God, and every life has equal value in that light. Every person has an inalienable right to participate equally in their governance, and the right to choose the voices that will speak in a representative capacity on behalf of those citizens is fundamental. The French Revolution overturned a centuries-old political arrangement in which power was vested in a king to reign over the people, in favor of a power arrangement that had as its fundamentals the consent of the people. Our Constitution enshrined representative democracy as the essential political compact between people and their government. But as we all know, representative government was narrowly defined when the Constitution was written. Native Americans, women, blacks were not allowed the vote and so had no right to participate in this new democracy. The struggle to expand the franchise over the next 100 years took a war, the Civil War, and an ugly history, frankly, of confrontation and oppression and murder. But the sacrifices were made not just in behalf of those who made those sacrifices. They understood then, as we must now, that our country needed the excellent service and enhancement that expansion of the franchise would give. And so we here today are inheritors and beneficiaries of their struggle and sacrifice. We have the vote. Now, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to continue the effort to balance the scales of representative government so that as many women as men participate in the decisions that shape our nation and our world? Electing women is not just a candidate-specific exercise. It also reaches the core value of integrating the Congress and other offices and all other organs of government with women's presence and women's voices. And I only have a little time here, but I wanted to tell a quick story. Without messing up my time, I'll see how I do here. Oh, the signs rattled me, I got to tell you. But anyway, you know, when I was running, this is another quick story. When I was running for president, they would put the signs up, and the men would ignore them. I'd sit there and go, oh my God, I've run out of time. So anyway, okay, 2 more minutes. All right, here we go. But quickly, why does it make a difference? It makes a difference because the voices need to be in the room. Many people here will remember, because it was televised, the fight over the Confederate flag when I was in the Senate. But there were many, many more, and one of the ones I love to talk about that never got any publicity. I was the first woman in history to serve on the Senate Finance Committee, and there was a bill that came through that committee to put a tax on mammograms. Actually, it was a 20% copay. All right, well, you know, a 20% copay on mammograms is a tax. So this goes around, and the guys are just kind of talking about, oh yeah, well, this is raise another few $100,000, and this will do that. And I said, wait a minute. I said, do you realize you're putting a tax on women's health across this country? You can't. How are you gonna go home and explain this to your voters? You could see the light bulbs popping. You could literally see them. It was like they had never thought that a 20% copay was a tax on the women who had elected them. We have to be in the room. We have to be heard. Are we going to continue the effort to wrest the power to control our bodies from men who do not have internal plumbing and who cannot experience reproduction, to give it to the individuals and to give it to the individuals whose lives are shaped by it? Choice is at its core an issue of power, not pregnancy. And so bite by bite incursions against the limited right that we have to abortion must be met step by step, clinic by clinic, issue by issue. Even for women like me, for whom pregnancy is a distant memory and hypothetical, not even hypothetical anymore, all right, but even for us, this issue is down to hand-to-hand combat on a battlefield not of our making or in our control. But we have to make the fight. Most importantly, are we going to continue to reach for the hearts and minds of young women who will not only inherit the fruits of our work, but who will be required to take the challenge forward? Last night, the conversation in the car turned to the comments of a very popular young actress who, when asked if she was a feminist, replied, "No, I don't hate men." Well, it's not enough to note that she's obviously confused on the concept. It falls to each and every one of us to make the case that feminists are people who believe in equality of rights, and representative government and democracy, and that really, and moving our country, perfecting our democracy so that it really does reflect the will of all the people. Feminism is inclusive. Men are as important in our fight for female freedom as the excellent service that women will render, and it can only inure to their benefit and to the benefit of the world. All over the world, the half of humanity, which has throughout most of its recorded history been dominated and directed by men in defining their roles and opportunities in society, are demanding change. Whether in Africa, where genital mutilation is being challenged, or in India, where public safety is the subject of mass marches, or in the heart of the Middle East, where women are fighting, sometimes at the risk of their lives, for the right to an education. From our vantage point here in the United States, we look upon the women in veils and burqas as images of oppression. We should not be so smug and remember that it was not too different here not too long ago. So we are here in convention to affirm our dedication to the emancipation of women and to organize our resources and our actions. We know that what is at stake is bigger than any one of us, or even of our generation. We believe that the patriotic call of our nation's fundamental compact demands our service to translate concept into reality and to perfect our democracy by our service. We are the grassroots movement of this feminist movement for equality precisely because we believe that every person should be included in the conversation about which way our generation will go. We are not only fighting today's battle, we are creating the landscape for the future. We will not let anti-democratic forces usurp the language of the debate, as was reflected in that young girl's comment. We will not let the racists and the homophobes and the Christian Taliban bully policy. We will stand up for the poor, for the unpopular, and for all people who deserve a voice to be heard. We will continue to reach out, to network, and to sing a song of freedom that the world needs to hear. So thank you for your excellent service. Thank you for being here, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk to you today. Thank you.
Thank you for your wisdom and your inspiration. Next, I'd like to introduce Patricia Ireland. She's the Advisory Committee co-chair for both NOW and the PAC. Patricia is the longest-serving president of NOW, serving from 1991 to 2001. And the NOW Elect Women for a Change campaign that Patricia initiated in 1992 played a pivotal role in making the Year of the Woman and electing a record number of women to political office, including Carol. You hear that? Campaign manager for a presidential campaign, Patricia did. Patricia is one of the most influential feminist leaders in this country and a leading figure in the worldwide feminist movement. We are fortunate that she continues to guide now and is here today to inspire us as we head into 2014, 2016, and beyond.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you. Well, having heard about the nameless female actor who denied being a feminist, I recall seeing a response from Ellen Page who said, "Is there any clearer proof that we still live in a patriarchy than that feminism is still considered a bad word?" So you have to pick your celebrities. I also, of course, am just delighted to be here, as always. I'm always inspired by all of you and by the wonderful panelists and our officers here, and especially the local activists who helped create this space for us here this weekend. I loved hearing the women from Congress and the state legislature. I also, of course, always love being with Ambassador Mosley Braun. As she mentioned at the end, I was pleased to come in and take over as the campaign manager during her presidential race. And her voice in the U.S. Senate, of course, was key after 1992. There's so many stories. I hope you don't mind if I tell one. And that is after the fight over the Confederate flag, as the ambassador was heading toward the elevator, which is for senators only, and walked in, and there was, what was his name, North Carolina? Jesse Helms. Okay, proper nouns are going, all right? I can almost not speak at all. Yeah, thank you. And that's why we have to have each other's backs. Jesse Helms was there, and he started humming Dixie. And the ambassador whipped around, and he said, "Oh, I was just trying to see if I could make the senator from Illinois cry." And she said, "Senator, with a voice like that, you bring tears to my eyes." So she was never at a loss for words. Well, as we know, we have a brief period, and I have a period of 7 or 8 minutes to give you the history of feminists in electoral office and politics for the entire course of our existence. I have therefore decided to limit it to 1982 to 2020. I started in 1982 because it represents a significant change in NOW's strategy. In 1992, June of 1992, June 30th to be specific, was the last day of the Equal Rights Amendment countdown campaign. We came up 82, oh gosh, I lost a decade there. 1982, sorry, I was flashing forward to 92 because it was such a victory, and 82 was not so much fun. But the fun part of it was that while we did not win the Equal Rights Amendment, we did build a huge nationwide movement. We had had a 10-year discussion about what equality between men and women would look like, what it would mean. We had people who were trained to do public speaking, fundraising, grassroots, door-to-door, and telephone canvassing to elect people in my own home county, Miami-Dade County, now turned out of office a 14-year veteran in the state Senate and replaced him with a former now chapter president. It was heady times. However, the reason I go to 2020 is because 1982, the deadline for the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment had been extended to June 30, 1982. That date was picked with a purpose, because that was the last election. 1982 was the first election post-reapportionment redistricting. Every 10 years, when the population is taken in a census, we reapportion and redraw the district lines for state elections and congressional elections. And at the 10-year period that we were in the struggle for the Equal Rights Amendment, that population had shifted and continued to shift to the point that in my own home state, which I know best, Tallahassee, the representation there was substantially disproportionate to the rural conservative areas, and the southern Palm Beach to Miami-Dade and around was substantially underrepresented. So we had all of us at the close of the countdown campaign who hadn't won yet. And we were not only very skilled and had a nationwide network, but we were pissed. And the reason we were was because we knew that every poll showed that we had a majority of every single category. A majority of women and men supported the Equal Rights Amendment. Every race, every ethnicity, a majority supported the ERA. Republicans as well as Democrats, every age sector, all of it supported ERA, and we could not get it into the United States Constitution because the people in Tallahassee and every state capital in the unratified states was not representing us and was not. I want politicians to pander. If we have a majority of support on the Equal Rights Amendment, I want them to pander to their voters and vote that into the Constitution. Now, when we did the analysis of why we had not passed the Equal Rights Amendment, what we found was that every woman in the state legislatures had voted for the Equal Rights Amendment. Every single woman, Republican and Democrat. All of the African Americans, all of the people of color who were in the state legislatures had voted for the Equal Rights Amendment. There just weren't enough of us there. And so the Turn In Now strategy in 1982 was to stop begging men in power for our rights and instead to become the people in power. So we recruited, we organized, we fundraised, we turned out the vote, and in 1982, November 1982, we had substantially changed the face of electoral politics in this country. We had enough pro-ERA people in Tallahassee and state capitals in North Carolina and everywhere else, Oklahoma. We could have passed the ERA, but the deadline was it was all gone. However, we also started filling the pipeline, and that's why, although now PAC, and when you are building the feminist White House out there with our Legos, we are focused, the now PAC is for federal candidates, but we have got to focus on the state and local candidates and races as well, for several reasons. One is that we need a pipeline, and if we are going to 2020 and the election of 2022, we'd better have some people moving up the pipeline. But equally important, the state and local races and the state and local policies are where voters see that electoral politics impact their lives. They often look at the U.S. Senate and they don't see the connection between their day-to-day lives and what goes on in Washington, D.C. But they know when their state representatives pass something bad. They know for sure when their local candidates and commissioners pass something bad or do something good. So if we are going to succeed with what has been talked about as the rising American electorate, we are going to have people in the pipeline, and we're going to have people seeing the importance of having them there. The rising American electorate is unmarried women and men of color and people who are 18 to 29. 59% of them are unmarried women and people of color, and they are our targets. 59% of those people are not registered to vote, compared to 70% who are voting at the other groups, the traditional voters. By 2018, people of color and unmarried women will be the majority of the voting age population. So we are going to fill up that pipeline. It's incredibly important that we do that, and at the same time, I think we have to recognize that if we flash forward from where we were when Shirley Chisholm ran for office, when Victoria Woodhull ran for president, when Carol Moseley Braun ran for president, and I was truly thrilled that she was there. I can't tell you the number of editorial board meetings that we went to and the number of debates where she would be the only presidential candidate to raise a certain set of issues. And by the next debate, they would all be talking about it. They owned it, man. They had embraced it. If she hadn't been there, it wouldn't have been addressed. So I am now going to tell you that in NOW's 2013 conference, we had a wonderful resolution, whereas since our nation's founding on the premise that all men are created equal, we have had a parade of Tom, Dicks, and Harrys elected president of the United States, none of whom has succeeded in securing women's constitutional equality, freedom from violence or discrimination, or equal pay. And whereas it is time for the Victorias, Shirleys, Carols, and Hillarys to show what feminist politicians' leadership can do, therefore be it resolved that from henceforth until 2016, NOW's 50th anniversary, NOW's political work should be designed to build toward the work and goal of electing a feminist woman president of the United States. So here's where you come in. We are building a feminist White House right here, right now, this very weekend. How many of you will buy bricks for the feminist White House? Hold up your hands. That's to fund the PAC's work. And if you buy bricks, how many of you will also sign up to work for feminist candidates at all levels? Because by doing that, by turning out a vote for your local feminist running for the school board or the county commission in a district that may include also a state legislative race, and on top of that a congressional or Senate race, and on top of that the presidential race, we get a 5 for with turning out one new voter. So we know we can do it, and we can only do it because of you, because of this organization, and because of this conference. And the deep, visceral understanding that the intersectionality of our issues and our strength means that we can go forward from here to a real victory, to a real feminist future. And I thank you for all you're doing and all you're going to do.